How many stories do you have? Have you ever thought how many others have similar stories to you? Welcome to Merging Lanes Podcast, a fan-based podcast where I take your story and find others similar online. If you have a story that you'd like to submit, email it to jukeboxginger88@gmail.com. Welcome, everybody, to Merging Lanes. This is a storytelling podcast where I, Jukebox Ginger, take fan-submitted stories and pair them with stories that I find online that are similar. This being the first episode, I've taken one of my stories and found two similar ones online to read to you today. So without further ado, let's get into it. This first one's called I'll Be Back. I grew up a big chunk of my life with my parents' border collie from 8 till I was about 22. I went on vacation. I told my dog, I'll be back, buddy. It was supposed to just be a visit to my boyfriend's. I made some sudden decision after getting snowed in and decided to move in with him. That's right, I didn't come back. About 3 months later, my mother texted me at 11 p.m. after I got off work to tell me my dog was put down. Obviously, I was absolutely devastated. I had him for so long. Honestly, it still hurts, and it's been a good 10 years. My dog never barked, never jumped, never even licked. He used to do this thing. If you bent over, he'd stick his nose to your head and sniff your hair. It was great. When I moved back to my home state a few weeks after he passed, it just hurt knowing I wasn't going to see my buddy. But for a good 6 months after he passed, I'd hear his sniffing and little huffs he'd do when greeting you. I'd wake up from a dead sleep hearing him. I'd lay on my bed or even on the floor watching TV, and I'd feel a little nose nudge on my back. Sometimes I think he still visits me. I'll get glances of him or I'll hear his collar. Sometimes I'll feel something on my feet. He'd do that for attention and loving. Could it be my mental? Could it be a placebo of me hoping I'll wake up one day and I'll have him at my feet? Maybe. But I honestly think my little old furry-tailed frisbee-loving buddy is always here. And to me, that helps me some days. That is a story I found on Reddit from Cherry Whiskey 30H1. I, of course, want to give credit to where I find these stories. Next up, Wait on the Bed. My cat was my shadow. That was her personality from the first month I had her, and eventually her name. She was supposed to be a family cat, but we bonded immediately, and everybody knew she was mine. When I moved out, she naturally came with me. We were together for 21 years. I sometimes wonder if she's still shadowing me, or if it's just a grief messing with me. Lots and lots of little stuff that makes the little fuzzy hole in my heart that much more absent. When I'm on the verge of sleep, I will often feel a weight jump on the bed and curl up in the crook of my legs, just like Shadow did every night. It's only when I reach down to scratch her ears that I become alert to the fact she isn't there. Same for my couch, except this one I nearly see instead of feel. A dark blur in my peripheral vision will leap up into the back of my couch and slink behind me. I turn and look, and nothing's there. More rarely, especially while in the kitchen, when I take a step back, I'll trip on something. The old habit was to cuss out my cat because every time this would happen, it was always her fault. But I'll now catch myself mid-cuss, remembering that she's gone. At least once a week, something will happen that pushes me to tears. I'd like to think it's my cat still with me, but it's probably just my mind still refusing to let her go. That is a story from Jericho Kane, also found on Reddit. Good story. I like it. And now to the fan-submitted story today, which is mine. This is a little bit longer and very personal to me, and whether it's fictional or fact, I'll let you guys use your imagination. This one's titled, My Dog Reno. I have an interesting story to tell you about a dog I once had named Reno. A little background to start this story. During the time this takes place, I was in 4th grade. I lived with my mom, sister, and stepdad in a 4-bedroom house that was second to last on a dead-end street. Each house sat on a couple acres with woods and a creek that ran through the backside of our property, about an acre back, give or take. Of course, as a kid who wasn't super social and not a ton of kids in the neighborhood to play with, it was perfect. We had a good-sized fenced yard, with a side driveway that went back on the left side of the house to a detached garage. The house had a main level with 3 bedrooms and an unfinished basement that had an additional room in the far corner, which where I slept. My room wasn't much to call a room. The only features were a couple walls and a ground window that was rusty and painted to the point that I could never open it to open. The window was old and worn, and although you could see fine through it, it was faded and had some old paint splotches that were there even before we moved in. I only put so much detail into this window because it will show up again later in the story. My mom worked long hours as a graphic art designer in downtown Kansas City, and my stepdad was in construction working odd jobs, which I'm pretty sure was all under the table and his hours varied. My sister and I rode the bus to school and walked home after. We spent a lot of early evenings by ourselves. My sister was a grade above me, and although we got along fine, we had different interests. We would play games or ride our bikes around the neighborhood. There was a ballpark not too far away that we would ride to mostly for the concession stands or to play with kids from school. There were many times, however, that I played by myself, wandering the property and even venturing further into the woods. One of my favorite spots was an area of the creek that had large rocks littered across, and the water backed up a little, creating not quite a water hole, but I played in it a lot, usually skipping rocks, searching for crawdads, or just staying cool on a hot summer day. On most of these ventures, Reno would tag along and keep me company. My stepdad brought Reno home as a baby several years prior. His uncle, who was in poor health, gave him to my sister and I as a gift. Although Reno was a great addition to our family, my stepdad was not at all a good guy. When he was home, he was usually getting drunk or physically abusive to me and my sister. Some weeks he beat me so bad I had to miss school. I don't want to go into too many details about him because that's not what the story's about, although having an idea about who he is as a person will play a role later on as well. Reno was a purebred Shar, and at this time in the story, he was 3 years old. He was very fit and weighed about as much as me. My sister liked him, but he definitely took a liking to me the most, which I loved. In the morning, I would feed and water him before school and let him run around the fenced part of the yard. During the day, he was in the garage. We tried leaving him in the fenced part of the yard, but when he got big enough, he would jump the fence to chase animals that would wander out from the woods, occasionally bringing back squirrels and other rodents looking for prey. After school, he would either hang out in the house with my sister and I lounging around, or he would wander around outside with me. At night, he would sleep downstairs with me, usually curled up in a ball on my bed, which helped since the basement was pretty eerie. One evening, after getting home from school, I went to let Reno out of the garage, which usually he was at the door waiting. However, this time he was in the back part of the garage, refusing to come out. This was a little odd, but not thinking too much into it, I went in to get him. He was acting as if he was trying to play, dodge me whenever I'd get close, and I thought it was pretty humorous. Eventually, I had him cornered, and as I reached out to grab his collar, he lunged forward, mouth open, and bit my hand. It happened so fast, I remember it not hurting until after I realized what had just happened, and he was back in the corner looking at me like he knew he was in big trouble. At this point, my hand was throbbing. I had 3 punctures in my palm and 2 on the backside of my hand, where his teeth sank in and blood was running down my arm. I left Reno in the garage and went back inside to clean up and get a hold of my mom. But why was Reno acting so weird? He had never done anything like that before, and he was clearly uncomfortable about leaving the garage. I wasn't mad at him, just confused. Shortly after the incident, my mom got home. She ended up taking me to the hospital to get stitches, and during the ride, there I explained what happened. This is where the story takes a serious twisted turn. That night, my stepdad got home late, and my mother had already informed him of what happened. He looked at my hand and asked me if I was okay, which I was. My mother and him bickered back and forth about what to do. They were both worried about Reno biting again, and the bickering ended with my stepdad saying he would take care of it, and he left the house. It wasn't until the next day that I would realize what take care of it meant. After my stepdad left the house, he apparently grabbed Reno out of the garage and loaded him into the truck. He never said where he took him, but he told us he took him into a field out in the country and tried to get him to run off. Reno refused, trying to lunge towards him, so he grabbed his shotgun from the truck and shot him in the face. What the fuck is right? To make it worse, he brought Reno's corpse back in his truck bed. Not only was my stepdad an abusive piece of shit, now he's killed my best friend. That following day, Reno laid motionless in the garage, and I was a wreck. Why in the hell did he shoot him? Something was clearly wrong with Reno. He never hurt anyone until yesterday, and now he's dead. My stepdad worked a later shift, and before leaving for work, he told me I had to haul Reno in a wheelbarrow out into the woods once the sun set and bury him. Again, I was in fourth grade, so 10 or 11 at the time. And this guy tells me to haul this headless dog that weighed as much as I did into the woods in the dark and bury him. I wasn't going to tell him no, though, for the fear of him whipping out his Gold's Gym work belt and giving me several swats on the ass for refusing to do what he said. Shortly after dinner, I threw on my shoes and went out to the garage. I grabbed a flashlight, shovel, and the wheelbarrow with Reno already in it. His lifeless body was laying on his side, his feet sticking over one end of the wheelbarrow, along with loose pieces of neck that dangled over the front. It wasn't until I was grabbing both arms of the wheelbarrow that I could see not quite half of his face was still attached to his body. I could see part of his tongue, several teeth, and even one eye staring blankly. I couldn't hold back tears. The whole time, pushing him back to the woods, I would stop to wipe tears away and attempt to pull myself together. Near my favorite spot in the woods, there was a massive tree that during full bloom shaded a large area around it, and Reno loved to lay underneath it whenever we were out there for long periods of time, which was quite often, especially during school breaks and weekends. The branches started pretty low to the ground, although at the time I could stand underneath of it. If I was to go back today, I would definitely have to hunch to get underneath. Other than being very distraught and still confused as to what happened the day before to cause Reno to bite me, digging a hole did not take long. I imagine part frustration with my stepfather helped. I pushed the wheelbarrow over to the hole, raised the arms, and closed my eyes, and could hear his stiff, lifeless body slide off and into the hole. I covered him up and quickly rushed home. At this point, it was so dark that even with the flashlight, the woods were a bit unsettling. A few weeks had passed, and I hadn't gone back into the woods, knowing that Reno was rotting away back there. Just freaked me out. My family never seemed to care that he was gone, besides me. It was a school night, and as usual, dinner, bath, and ready for bed by 9. Usually by 8 o'clock, I was in my room reading books or just playing with random stuff. I had several model cars on the shelves. I had several model cars on shelves that I had built along with other random things. One dresser that sat across from the foot of my bed, and the nightstand to the left of where my head rests that held a lamp and an alarm clock. Outside of my room was a big open basement, random gym equipment, washer and dryer, and a box screen TV with a VCR. I had a collection of old tapes, most of them I had seen multiple times. I remember falling asleep at a decent time, same as most school nights. It was after midnight when I woke up shivering. The basement was usually a bit colder than the rest of the house, but nonetheless, I was awake and I was cold. The room was dark, almost pitch black, just the way I liked it. The only light in the room came from the moon shining through the window, giving off just enough light to make out the shapes of the objects in the room. The window. Wait, what? It was open. That's strange. I must be dreaming. I continued scoping out the room when I felt something move between my legs. I directed my eyes towards the foot of the bed and saw a large black blob filling the gap between my feet. Hmm, I must have been lazy last night and fell asleep without folding and putting away my laundry. It moved again. I don't remember having clothes on my bed. The blob started moving again, growing into a figure of something so familiar. There was a stench coming from whatever it was that was on my bed in front of me. Something so foul it made my eyes water. A low, rumbling growl filled the room, one that sounded just like Reno's. Could it be him? No, no, I'm just dreaming. The black silhouette of what looked like my dead dog seemed to almost hover towards me as the growl grew louder, and then I woke up. Whew, just a nightmare. Man, that was crazy, I thought as the sun shined brightly through the window, my heart still pounding as I noticed the window was still open. My throat tightened as I tried to get a breath in. I looked down at my bed. There was no figure anywhere, but something else. Dirt. Streaks of moist dirt covered my blanket with what appeared to be smeared paw prints, forming almost a circle between my legs. I jumped out of bed, trying to process what I was seeing. Holy shit, my stepdad is going to kill me. I stripped my bed and threw it in the washer before putting on sneakers and sneaking out the back door. The sun was up, but it had to be early because my alarm hadn't gone off yet and the house was silent. I made it to the tree where I had buried Reno in seconds, it seemed like, expecting to see a mound of dirt where I had buried him, but what I found was terrifying. The spot where Reno was supposed to be was empty. Pile of loose dirt surrounded a hole in the ground. It looked like something had either found his corpse and started digging away, or even worse, something dug itself out. There were claw marks everywhere, but no body, no dead dog. I never ran home so fast. I tried to think of a way to tell my mom or sister what had happened, but I couldn't. Something told me they wouldn't believe me. I spent many nights with lights on, tossing and turning, and expecting to see Reno again, but nothing. If you liked today's stories and would like to submit one of your own, you know where to email me from the intro. Send me an email and I'll get back to you. And maybe, just maybe, I'll tell your story on here as well.